tell us a little bit more about what is going on. The candidates are blasting China for a variety of potential sins.
Yeah, that's true, Pam. Whatever they think best serves their agenda is pretty much what they're going after. Look, attacking China is kind of a tried and true way of handling politics when it comes to candidates. This time around, yesterday's market turmoil really gave them an opportunity to push their agendas and what they think is most important. Number one, of course, is Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner right now, who's been talking about China with some regularity throughout his campaign. He started in the morning with an Instagram post talking about how things are going to get very messy. Then he took to Twitter to attack China about how the United States relationship and how close the two economies are was very problematic, saying a Trump presidency would, quote, uncouple the two economies. Then you had the Democratic front, or one of the top Democratic candidates, Bernie Sanders, take to Twitter himself, talking about how this was an effect of trade policy and that the U.S. needs to change its trade policy because that's what's leading to what happened. Now, obviously, if you talk to economists or analysts, Pim, not a lot of thought that either of those things were directly involved with what happened in the market yesterday. But one of the interesting things always to watch is how candidates treat China during the campaign, because if you get to the White House, if any of them get to the White House, things will change compared to what they can say now to what they can do there.
Phil, any real political fallout from this? As you said, China is an easy target, political target, particularly at this point in the campaign cycle. Does any of it really matter?
One of the interesting things, Pim, is actually from Scott Walker, the Wisconsin governor, who is at one point considered a Republican frontrunner, still kind of in the middle of the pack right now. He called on President Obama to cancel next month's state visit with Chinese President Xi Jinping, saying, quote, rather than honoring Chinese President Xi Jinping with an official state visit next month, President Obama should focus on holding China accountable. What's interesting there is some other Republicans I've noticed have picked up on that. So the near-term impact politically is there's going to be some pressure on the White House here. The White House actually dispatched the president's national security advisor, Susan Rice, to Beijing today to start working with the Chinese in advance of that. But, Pim, it's not just what happened in the market when you look at what's going on with China and U.S. politics right now. You also have cyber attacks. You have the provocations in the South China Sea. So there's issues right now that the Obama administration is facing on the foreign policy front that the politics are a bit complicated, and there could be some near-term impact as the administration prepares for that visit next month from Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Okay, you talked about the political part of it, but what about the business part of it? You've got Republican candidates talking about China in, well, the most negative of terms, and yet companies such as Boeing, GM, Caterpillar, they all depend on China for a big part of their export business.
What's interesting is who you haven't seen attack China, and there's a couple reasons for this. One, obviously, there are candidates that are very cognizant of the fact that one rough day in the markets does not make a crisis and doesn't necessarily make obvious scapegoats. But there's also another issue here, and that's a lot of very big donors have very big interests in China right now. If you just want to look at prominent Republicans, you look at Bush administration officials like Hank Paulson, extremely close relationships with China. So what's interesting to watch, Pim, is you look at the candidates who are using this to push for certain purposes, to push their agenda forward. But you also look at candidates who are not jumping in on this, not jumping on the bashing, and it's twofold. One, they're very cognizant of the business interests that some of their donors have. They're very cognizant of the business interests just in general in the United States. But also, there's a recognition, as I said earlier, that if they do get to the Oval Office at some point, if they do at some point have to deal with China on a bilateral basis, some of the comments that they make now could be held against them. Foreign policy and diplomacy in general requires sometimes people, before they get to the Oval Office, to maybe hold their horses a little bit. Obviously, that doesn't appear to apply to Donald Trump right now, Pam.
Well, and when you talk about Donald Trump, it's interesting that he is so negative on China in a lot of the fact that Macau is a big gaming hub. Of course, Steve Wynn and Sheldon Adelson depend on China for a lot of their business.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I think the interesting thing that Donald Trump has picked out better than anybody else at this point is he finds things that resonate with people. And this is an issue that he thinks resonate. I think if you poll how China rates in the United States in the political sphere, attacking them always polls well. That's why it's something that's kind of tried and true in the political sphere right now. Donald Trump is seizing on that. And like a lot of things that you've seen or heard from Donald Trump over the last couple of weeks and months, it doesn't necessarily track with his business interests, doesn't necessarily track with his kind of how he operates on a general basis. But it does resonate with the electorate, or at least the 20 to 25% that his appeal has really grown and stayed with over the last couple of weeks, Pam.
All right.